First of all, I would like to tell you that maybe you already know that you are a great model for a lot of young designers, architects here, also here in Romania. And I'd like to ask you, how did you decide to become a designer? And maybe you can share some advice or some of your experience to the young students.
Sure. When I became a designer, I was originally going to study architecture, and then at the last minute, the university didn't accept me. So they had a new program called industrial design, and it was the first year of that program. So I didn't even really know what it was. But I did when I went to the program. I realized it's everything I wanted to do, because when I was a teenager, I was reading books about Charles Eames and Raymond Loewy and Le Corbusier and all these people who were shaping everyday life. And I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to do physical things that really were part of you and I and our lives. So that's how it started. I went into university. I did my undergraduate in industrial design. Then I went and did a master's in design in Italy because the Italian design movement was so powerful back in the 80s. And then I think that I went back, got myself a job, which I'm a big believer in. I mean, a lot of young designers, they get out and they kind of want to be famous or want to do things right away or have their name on things right away. I think I went and paid my dues, and I worked 7 or 8 years for an office, worked very hard, and I worked in what I call below the line industrial design, which is things that people would never realize are designed. Like a cockpit of an airplane is a good example of that, or the inside of a refrigerator, or train seats in a train. So I did these kind of projects. I even designed at that time military product for the Canadian military. So, but with that, it was very hardcore kind of engineering stuff. I learned a lot, and then I went on my own. I started teaching, and I went on my own in '93 to open my own practice in New York. And I was penniless, basically. And I slept on my brother's floor, trying to figure out how I'm going to survive. I was also a part-time DJ, so I sold 16,000 records for $6,000 US, and that gave me enough rent to pay for rent for in New York for a couple of months. And I started looking for work, and I knocked on 100 doors, finally found one company to work for. And the thing I learned at that time, and I think a lot of young designers should understand this, I went and worked for companies that no one had ever heard of, and companies that were producing bad product, but they had the capability of producing good products. So I was an asset to them. So what I learned is, as a designer, is that just because I'm a designer doesn't mean I run after companies like Alessi or B&B Italia or something like that, because, they're going to get me famous. Because the problem with that is there's tens of thousands of people doing exactly that, Everybody wants to work for the same companies. What you do is you find some little industry nearby you that's producing lighting, let's say, and go in there and make some really good new work with them and push them. And the beauty of that, and what I learned, was threefold. One was I basically created brands in the United States that never existed before, made them big. 2 was I got to design lots of interesting product. And 3 was I made a lot of money. If I go work for some design company, I make one little object for them. It's meaningless in the sense of survival. So so really at the end of the day, I'd say my advice would be perseverance. You can't ever quit. You got to keep going, because it's a tough profession, like most professions are today. Secondly, diligence. You have to work hard to get somewhere. The difference of being, let's say, a musician or something, or a model or actress, there's a lot of pressure you have to hit when you're young. Designer, architect, you could be 100 years old and be productive and working like Oscar Niemeyer or anybody like this. So it's a long profession. So you just keep persevering. And I think the third part of that is you got to recognize whether you're really talented or not. I think the biggest, most important part, I think, of our human existence is to be, the younger you are and the more you understand what your strengths are and what you can contribute and what you can do in this world, the better off you are, and the good chance you'll have some sort of success and a good profession and contribute. A lot of people waste a lot of time not knowing what they really want to do, or they're in the wrong field in the first place. And that's a tough thing to admit to oneself, but it has to be done, a kind of editing process. So when I was teaching for many, many years, I was very very ruthless in a way, but I got a lot of students to leave the department if they didn't seem like they were really fit for the profession. But find them an alternative, Like, you're really not very good at this, but you're pretty good graphically. Maybe you should move into graphic design, for example. And I was the only professor, I realized, in all the schools telling my students those sorts of things,
Did you ever think to continue also in getting involved into building design?
I'm doing building right now, a lot. I'm doing 11 buildings right now.
Right.
Yeah, all over the world. So I just finished building a condominium in Latvia. I'm working on 6 buildings in Manhattan, in New York. I'm doing one in Miami, So quite a few projects, yeah. I love doing building now because for me, after doing industrial design for 30 years and interior design for 15, it's like the next extension for me. So now I can do the micro and the macro.
How does green design is involved in your creation, taking into consideration that the green and eco-friendly trend becomes more and more important in everyday life, and
Yeah.
it means comfort and sustainability?
Yeah, it's always been important. When I studied in undergraduate in Canada, we were very green. Canada's a very green country to begin with. It was always ecologically savvy, good recycling, all that kind of stuff. So I was brought up that way. So I didn't know anything different. But then it got out of fashion, and everybody forgot about it, and the world got very decadent. The real culprit actually wasn't designers; it was the companies that produce goods. I mean, we have very little control over that. Meaning, if we didn't exist tomorrow as designers, the companies are still going to do what they do, right? So the only thing the designer does is he comes in and he can sometimes talk to companies about trying to change this polymer to that one because it's a little bit better for the environment, or et cetera, et cetera. So I push a lot of those things. My work has always been very, very environmentally sensitive because I have a big knowledge about this. The thing is that from a distance, I think some media or people don't see it as that because it's full of color and full of new form and full of energy. So the assumption immediately is that it's not eco, which is very interesting. And then someone shows, an interior it's all made of wood, and they think that that's eco. It's a big question of whether, most of our wood is not eco today, by the way. Most of it is MDF, which is toxic and carcinogenic and really dangerous. So that's the misconception. It's not an aesthetic, right?
Do you have your favorite object or creation from the so many that you have created, something that has a special story behind which you are very attached to?
There's a lot of that stuff on the internet, and people can read those stories and all that, but I'm not really attached to anything, meaning like I love what I do. I'm very focused on the projects I'm working on now and the future. I've done some things that I'm proud of. I've done a lot of projects that I'm quite proud of. I think did some contribution, but I don't have a singular favorite, and it's hard to, I mean, I've designed 4,000 things now. To pick one is kind of difficult. It's like if you ask me tomorrow what my favorite food is, I don't have one favorite dish. I don't have one favorite song. I don't have one favorite building.
It's a continuous experience.
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from, and I think that's how I see design too. Design is this kind of contribution where there's so much to touch in people's lives, I could design a nice sink or toilet tomorrow, and I could design a nice small building tomorrow, and I could design something as strange as a line of women's brasiers, which is what I'm doing in Brazil right now. So, lot to do.